Episode 32, a really great interview with Ryan from GemRate, Part 1. Welcome to episode 32 of the Card Diary by Hobby S. Thompson. I am your host, Denny Cards, the self proclaimed jack of all trades, master of none. And as I like to paraphrase Jay Z, you could be listening to any podcast in the world right now, but you're here with me. And so thank you so much for doing so. I recorded the following interview with Ryan from GemRate earlier in the month of August, just fresh after the National, but I wanted to, I guess I waited to get to the grading chapter and guest episodes because I was kind of going through some things after National, and so I'm really glad that I got to talk those thoughts out with my sports card therapist, your sports card therapist, Rob G, the sports card therapist. And as I record this, I just hit 50,000 accounts reached in the last 30 days on Instagram. And I made a gratitude post about how I love the hobby community on Instagram. But I also love this podcast and its listeners. So thank you very much for listening. And I'm sure there's a lot of overlap in between the two. But I really do appreciate all of you and the support. So, okay, so here's the thing, right? We're here to talk about grading. The hobby really moves fast, y'all. Just in the past week, grading has gotten a ton of attention with two ultra-modern football cards going from PSA 4 and 5 to BGS Gem Mint, one of them hitting, I think it was a Black Label 10. And also, card cleaning is back in the hobby zeitgeist. I mean, it's always been a topic, but maybe hotter now, so to speak. And so, this episode really could not have come at a more perfect time. But here's the thing. What you're going to hear from Ryan is truly outstanding. He was such a good interview. And Ryan, I think you're listening to this because you listened to my podcast as a whole, but you were excellent. So thank you so much. I may have to do 3 parts. I thought about doing 2 parts, but I was like, oh wow, we really went long, but it was so good. It was such good information. So I really hope people enjoy it. Um, so here's the thing. I am, Denny Cards on Instagram, Denny underscore cards. I'm not just sports cards, but I definitely post like maybe, I don't know, something like 90% sports cards. And in that 90%, probably like, I don't know, just throwing out numbers out there at this point, but like 75% basketball and especially pre-Panini basketball. But there are it's Denny cards and I don't discriminate and I love cardboard all types and my kids love Pokemon and TCG and I remember collecting Magic the Gathering cards when I was a kid. Um, but it's funny because there are other members in the card family on Instagram. So uh, you know, uh, just to name a few, basketball card guy, shout out to Jonathan, sports card therapist, we just mentioned Rob, of course, 90s kid card collector, Curtis, like, shout out to all of you. But, when your name is just cards, it's funny because there is still a bias or presumption that we are talking about sports cards, but the world of Pokemon and TCG, but I guess really just Pokemon, actually outperforms sports cards, at least in the card grading space. And that's what you can see when it comes to our guest, Ryan, because I was listening to the recording so I could know when to kind of like make it into a part one, part two, and I haven't gotten to part three yet, but I'm still figuring all that out. But he made a post on Instagram on August 1st about grading in July 2023, and you can go check it out yourself. But just in PSA, and we're just talking about one grading company, but of course the main company when it comes to resale value. In 1 month, July 2023, over 500,000 cards were submitted for grading just in Pokemon. Okay. Baseball, just under 200,000. Football, about 130,000. Basketball, almost 100,000. Other sports combined, they don't even crack 100,000. So combine all of those non Pokemon cards, aka sports cards, and you still don't even get close to just Pokemon. And it's really interesting because this grading space. we have to remember it's not just about cards. Of course, this is the card diary, but there's also, I guess what I'm saying is it's not just single cards. There's also grading of sealed wax packs. And I don't know about boxes, but I've definitely seen sealed packs. I know BBCE does the sealed wax authentication. But there's grading for all sorts of items such as coins, music, Funko Pops, video games. Um, why don't we just go ahead and grade books, clothing, shoes, purses, furniture, sports cars, non-sports cars like minivans? Why don't we just go ahead and grade food, um, animals? Well, I guess not living, like taxonomy to animals, plants, fruits, vegetables. Um, that makes me think of a really bad joke, but yeah, just digest it all through your body. Let's grade all that. This is where I could really use a co-host to be like, okay, Danny, that's way too far. You got to stop with that. But my main point was, PSA, we think about them with card grading, and especially sports cards, but they have this whole other big component when it comes to Pokemon that passes sports cards. And it's interesting, if you look in PSA's website, they actually have a historical timeline, like a chronology of where they've come as a company. And they started out as a coin grading company. I think I pulled it up here in Wikipedia. Yeah, it's like this isn't the PSA website, but just in Wikipedia, it says PSA was launched in July 1991 by David Hall, owner of the coin grading company Professional Coin Grading Service, to serve collectors as a third party card grader. The business initially struggled due to a low demand of collectors wanting their cards to be graded. So it's really interesting, history and where we are, where we've come from. And so, this is not at all, pro or anti any grading company. I just want to be very upfront about that. But when you are the industry leader, you do get the most attention, right? Both good and bad. But right now they're the resale king. That's where people go to for their grading if they want to have the highest resale value. And I have been a customer of, I guess, 4 grading companies now, and I see the virtues in all of them. But it's really interesting because, and I'm gonna have to think about maybe talking about this more in a later intro. But the why did we start grading in the first place? I think a lot of us just think about so much of the focus is on resale value because we're trying to, especially people are trying to grade and flip. They just want to think about having the highest monetary value for their holder or their slab. But we can't forget that people do have in the past and also still currently grade for authenticity. That's a huge part of grading. And so people are going to continue to grade. I don't think that's going to really slow down. um, I mean, maybe it stagnates or maybe it does slow down, but I think that it's here to stay. That's definitely true in the hobby. So I'll keep it at that. I wanted to make this intro under 10 minutes so we can get right to Ryan. So without further ado, my chat with Ryan from GemRate. All right, I think we are live. Welcome to what I think will be, well, sorry, I won't say live like this is streaming, but it's a live recording. Sorry, Ryan. Welcome to what I think will be an episode numbered in the low 30s of the Car Diary by Hobby S. Thompson. The reason I don't know for sure the episode number is because I'm trying this thing where I record a little bit ahead of time so that I can fit in guests with the chapter episode I'm doing. And right now, my chapter episode that I plan to do is for grading. So I would love to have this series of guest episodes regarding grading. And when I thought about this subject matter, I was wondering how to get an industry expert on this podcast because it's still relatively new. So, how fortuitous would it be that I meet today's guest at the Industry Insider exclusive dinner party hosted by Beckett? I snuck into that one because I'm not an industry insider. And actually, I think I might have just admitted to a crime. So I might have to check the statute of limitations in Illinois for this. But there were some big time hobby folks in the mist, and I actually mistook my guest for one of them. Ryan, I don't know if we should say which one.
You could say it. It was pretty great, actually. I
I
forgot
can
that even
say it.
happened, but yeah, that
Oh
was pretty
yeah. Well, that
phenomenal.
was it was almost like you're at the bar and like that was my opening line to you or something. But I mistook him for a unknown or faceless individual. I mistook him for car porn. I don't know if it was me or someone else was like, "Hey, that's car porn over there." I was like, "What? Really? What's going on?" So, but this led to a hilarious start to a wonderful conversation with you at the bar. So not a lot of people, I think, not a lot of people are going to know you by face or even by name. But if you are on Instagram and grading is important to you, you have to know his Instagram account, GemRate, because every month he puts out publicly available information in a very easily digestible chart that folks like me love and look forward to. He grew up in Cleveland, now lives in New York, worked in finance, advertising, data analytics before getting into the hobby full time to use all those skills from the non-hobby world. And I think you're going to know and love this fella, Ryan Stasinski from GemRate and GemRate.com. Welcome to the pod.
Nailed it. Thank you for having me on. It was great meeting you in Chicago. Excited to continue on with this relationship.
Awesome. So I'm so glad that I went up to you because I didn't realize three things. One, that you were the person behind GemRate. Two, that you listen to my podcast. Thank you so much. That's awesome. And three, that you're absolutely hilarious, which I would not have guessed from your content because it's about creating company pop reports. So we had just a great conversation. And now in hindsight, I'm like wondering, is it because we were having adult beverages? But so we're gonna find out now. you know.
Oh God.
But
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I mean, that's funny. I tend to be pretty dry on all the stuff I do too because I'm such a data junkie and I want to sort of like
mhm.
keep that, you know, persona to some degree. But I kind of think of what you're doing here as like the hot ones of the hobby. I don't know if you watch the Sean Evans stuff with the wings and you get a lot of vulnerability in your podcast. I like that. So
Oh,
anyways, I was excited. I like listening to it. Very excited to be a guest on it.
I'd be
You don't
so
watch
yeah.
hot ones? Oh
No,
man.
no, I just don't have the interviews in person where I could have the person sweat in front of me. I've definitely watched
Yes.
Hot Ones. I love it. There's definitely a way to get someone vulnerable by making them completely lose their senses because of insane. I forget what the units are. Scoville units of habanero ghost peppers. And then yes, but thank you so much. That's a really nice compliment. I now it makes me want to go watch some of them. But um, so this introduction, I we're gonna see how long this goes. We're gonna see if this is gonna go long enough for two-parter or not. But before we get to GemRate, I really wanted to kind of get I did a little bit of a brief introduction, which thank you so much for giving me a bio. You're like the first person who actually, maybe not the first, but um, just thank you for giving me a bio. Nothing against my past guests, but you actually understood the assignment, so I really appreciate that. Um,
Yeah, of course.
then I mentioned how you worked in finance and advertising and data analytics. All of this, I'm sure, just dovetail. It goes really neatly into what you're doing right now. So, is there anything that you want to kind of like share origin story, not just like with work going into with your current work, but like your time, like as a hobbyist and collector?
No, I mean, look, I'm somebody that sort of, I sent you that bio, and it really is sort of just like a non or unconventional path to sort of like where I'm at today. But I like learning. I've heard you say the same. Like I like just sort of like being a sponge and sort of taking on as much as I can. I've gotten exposure to a lot of different industries, a lot of different ways of just thinking about, understanding data, understanding people. And so, I learned a lot about data through finance. I learned a lot about people through advertising, and then I learned a lot about just like moving fast, making mistakes, and sort of building a company through startups. And so, I really wanted to sort of take my own shot, and that's sort of how I sort of stumbled into GemRate a few years ago. But a lot of it has come from just really like bringing hard to come by data to the market, whether that was in finance or whether that was in advertising or whether that was in the startup world. It's all sort of been like taking data that is not easily found and trying to wrap it in a way that makes sense. And so that's kind of what that's the origin of like, well, that's a lot of my background, and that's sort of the origin of GemRate in a lot of ways.
Okay. Um, how about you as a collector, just, with the cards and the cardboard itself? Like, who do you PC? Like, are you like a Browns Cavaliers fan from because you grew up there, or are you like a, Knicks Giants Jets fan because you're in New York?
Yeah, I was a horrible collector early on, and then I took my long hiatus from the hobby. I like making transactions. I'm somebody that likes to sort of like see things move. It's sort of like how I live in a lot of ways, and I am definitely like a bit of a chaos junkie. So I definitely like don't sit and hold a lot of things, or at least
Mhm.
historically haven't sat and held stuff for a long period of time. I'm definitely more, I'm a Clevelander, a diehard Clevelander, and so I definitely PC a lot of Cleveland players now.
Mm,
Um, and I like a lot of like tier two stuff. So I try to sort of like be the first consumer of what I'm building, and so I
mhm,
use GemRate to sort of like surface like things that I just think like could have potential in the long term to be like more appreciated. Things that might be just like underappreciated today, and that the price sort of reflects that. I'm hesitant to say undervalued because that sort of gets you know whatever frowned upon. But I just like things that sort of like people are overlooking, and so my pockets of the hobby definitely like speak to that. And then I love Bowman, which is like one of the things which is kind of um, I didn't even know existed as a market when I first started getting back into cards in 2020. And I like that just because there's like a lot of information asymmetry there. You can learn a lot about a prospect just watching their Instagram stories. And so, there's not a lot of people doing that. So, anyways, I'm in and out of a lot of basketball stuff, a lot of tier two Panini stuff, and then I do a lot of Bowman collecting.
mm.
And within that, I collect like a lot. I'm big on basketball, so I collect a lot of like Evan Mobley right now, for example.
And I'm sorry to hear all that. No, I was gonna say about the Cleveland Browns aspect. I've gone through your archives. I do this for almost every guest. I go through their Instagram all the way to the beginning, and I've noticed that you've done specific before the pop reports for the grading companies. I feel like your content has evolved and changed. Where in the beginning, I think you did do some specific iconic cards and sets and like they were in baseball, hockey, basketball, Pokemon. That's what I could see from like at least the image of the post in your feed. And so in my head, my joke was like, man, this guy does not like football, and it must be because he's a Cleveland Browns fan.
I mean, look, there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, if you're from Cleveland, usually you're number one with the Browns, and that's like
Uh-huh.
how sort of how you ride. And I just grew up in the era where the Indians at the time were sort of in the '90s, were like hitting their stride, and I was always just a big Cavs fan. And the Browns
Gotcha.
were such a mess, and so and they've been such a mess for such a long time. That franchise drives me nuts.
Yeah.
And they're like very representative of a lot of what is something that's hard to overcome in Cleveland sometimes, which is like people are just always waiting for the
Mm,
other shoe to drop, and the
yeah.
Browns like perfectly represent that. And so, anyways, I'm sort of like cautiously optimistic about the Browns, but one, I'm not like as big into the NFL collecting just because it's so concentrated around quarterbacks, and two,
Yeah.
I am like much less passionate about the Browns relative to how much I love the Guardians and the Cavs.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like you definitely had a great season or two with the Cavaliers with LeBron coming back and even before he left, but that must have been a wonderful championship year to be a huge Cavs fan. And then the Browns, yeah, I mean, I- they're almost like it's almost like the perfect name with I'm not going to make a terrible joke, but no, actually maybe this is a terrible joke. The brown bags, right? I mean, that's the franchise where they put the fans when they're embarrassed or they're not doing well, they put the brown bags on the brown paper bags on their heads. Is that right?
I don't even know. I'm sure there was a point in time when that was
Okay. Well, they
something we
might have
did.
they might have to switch from paper to plastic.
I know. I
Sorry,
know.
that was the bad joke. I shouldn't have said it. Okay, kids, if you're listening, please don't put plastic bags over your heads. Although, I mean, really, just what are your parents doing? Okay, so I would like to start with a very basic thing because I think the episode title for this is going to be like grading company pop reports, and we're going to dive in deep and get a little bit more archaic or more intermediate to advanced. But I want to start with the basic of what a pop report is. So I'm sure you have a definition. I asked ChatGPT what the question, what it is. So I'm just going to read it out loud, and then you just let me know if you want to add on to it. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. A pop report is a published census showing the total number of cards graded by a third party grading company. For any given card in any given grade, e.g., Mint 10, there will be a published pop report And they don't even say that stands for population report, but okay. Pop report showing how many times the grading service has awarded that exact grade to that exact card.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. Spot on. Yeah, it is interesting to even hear them say census because in the comic book world, they actually just refer to it as a census. So I think
Mm.
pop report's a little bit more specific to like the trading card world.
Well, I mean, Skynet, that was like a real thing, right? And I just feel like, you're replaceable, I'm replaceable. I can't wait for the next podcast where it's just ChatGPT talking in the voice of Alexa or Siri. That's gonna be
Look,
great.
I love ChatGPT. I know a lot of people are skeptical of it, but as somebody who's working with code a lot, it saves me a lot of time.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So you were on the Sports Cards Nonsense podcast with Jesse Gibson and Mike Giuseppe 2 months ago. It was the episode June 5th, and I forgot that I had listened to it a while ago, but I re-listened to it just to make sure that I wasn't like duplicating questions and doing too much. So I almost feel like this might be the supplemental episode to that. So if there's any listener who hasn't checked their podcast out, I'm actually wearing their T-shirt that I got from National. Perfect timing. I heard they shouted me out on the podcast, and all I got to say is everything Mike said was wholly inaccurate. Um, so that's all I'll say about that. But
Is
Jesse,
that your setup to do your geo impression? Because it's a solid one. I'm ready for it. I'm always ready for
no, I can't do that, Jesse. No, with your sausage fingers. I feel like my Simmons was a lot better, but I just got to get into character and like I don't know. Sorry, but thank you, Ryan, for asking about that. And again, thank you for listening. Every download counts. So here's the thing. I want to talk about GemRate, and again, the reason I want to say GemRate.com is I didn't, GemRate is the Instagram account, and there's so much information, but GemRate.com is where you have a lot of the actual raw information and a lot of like things that it's just much more information. But in Instagram, everything has to be easily digestible, and you do a really good job with that. So one of the things I love most about GemRate is that it costs my favorite amount of anything in the world, free 99.
it.
So how does GemRate work? You can take this as different ways, right? Like how does it work from a uh, business standpoint? Like I know we've talked about that a little bit, but I want you to explain to the listeners. But how does it work? And you can take that in any way you want.
Yeah. So when I got back in the hobby, I was definitely somebody I bought into a lot of breaks. I was like overwhelmed with just like all the information, sort of all the mistakes that I was making, and sort of just like it's really hard to navigate pop reports in particular. And so, and I also at the time I don't really mention this much, but I was also somebody that was invested in options of collectors universe at the time because I was somebody that was pretty active in the stock market. And so I was just doing a lot to sort of understand like what was happening, how can I make better sense of these pop reports and just sort of understanding the tech a little bit better. Prior to that, I was actually building a company related to finance. And I was doing stuff in the DFS world where I was like, that's daily fantasy sports, DraftKings, stuff like that, where I was pulling in projections from a bunch of different sources, like last minute for basketball. And so I was sort of learning how to just like pull in information from websites programmatically. You could call it scraping if you'd like. I just like to say pulling in information programmatically. Um, Scraping can be a dirty word to a lot of people, but anyways, I pull in information from the different sites, and the idea is just to make it a little bit more useful, package it in a way that maybe is consistent across the different companies. So the way that PSA talks about their population report is different than how Beckett talks about their population report, different than SGC, different than CGC. And so I just wanted to tell a little bit broader of a story. And to do that, I started pulling in the information. I really was focused on PSA to start. And it was just to help me sort of think about like how many cards exist, to your definition of the pop report, just like what's the sort of frame of reference or what does the landscape look like for certain sets, for certain cards, for certain players. And so I just started figuring out how I could do that with PSA's data first and went really deep into that and started to see that there's a bigger macro story that I could tell. And that's how sort of the Instagram stories and Instagram posts started to emerge. But I was really just building it for myself to understand like of all these cards that I have now, I had a ton of cards. Which ones of these are set up to grade? Could I actually make some money on these? Is there sort of certain cards in here that could be good long-term holds because they're just, there's not a lot of them on the pop report, and so just really trying to figure out like what to do with my collection was sort of the starting point. All these other things were jumping off points, but it was really just sort of how do I get the most out of my collection and figure out what I actually had because I had a lot of stuff I was really big in like the 2015 Guardians. I really liked Francisco
Mm,
Lindor, and he
mm,
was a rookie when Beckett was pretty high profile in the industry. And so if you just looked at like the PSA pop report at the time, you'd think that Lindor had like nothing graded, but it was all
mm,
graded with Beckett at that time. And so I was like, well, this is kind of goofy. Like I'm like, if I'm trying to understand the Lindor market, I'm just looking at PSA. I'm only telling a third of the story. And so and from a seller standpoint, people always want to tell you the sort of underreported part of the story, which is like through the lens of a single pop report because it makes things look
right.
look more rare, right? And so I was thinking about somebody who is making a lot of purchases and not necessarily fully informed. How could I help myself understand the market a little better? And in general, how could I make this market more accessible to people who just like either don't know it as well or the data is just hard to come by? And so that's kind of like the the like I don't know, that was like the motivating factor was just like how can I make better decisions for myself, but it build a tool that could be more sort of, utilized more broadly utilized across the hobby.
That is so awesome. I mean, I really, I can't wait for this episode to be published for people to know that this came from a place of here's a collector buying into breaks, spending money in the hobby, just like an everyday man, but you have this skill set. I'm like Liam Neeson and Taken. You're like, I have a particular set of skills, and I'm going to utilize them for the benefit of not just myself, but for other people. And you're sharing this information out. I think that's fantastic. So, I mean, I guess I don't even have to. Had a follow up question is like, do you like to grade? You do grade your cards. You like to grade. You like to submit to grading.
Yeah, I grade a lot. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love going to the national. I didn't buy a single card, but I submitted cards with, four different grading companies.
Mm.
And I like to test out the different grading companies. One of the people I listen to most in the space is Neo, who you met also when we were at the hobby event.
Yes,
But he's
yes.
also sort of like, he's big on the different companies play a different role and can sort of like service different needs in the hobby. And so I like it. I mean, you could look at my Instagram profile. I graded with HGA. I've graded with a lot of companies in the space. I'm not shy about
Mm,
it. I enjoy sort of understanding like the pros and cons. Grading is one of these like hot buttons that people really feel like they want to voice their opinion on. But I think that
yes.
there's, and one of the reasons that GemRate has been received pretty well is that it's information that people can use as support. And it's
Mm,
hilarious. People will use the same data point uh,
mhm.
and use it to defend Beckett and use it to defend PSA positively or
Right.
SGC or whatever it is, and it's the same data point. They're just sort of like spinning it in a way that sort of fits their needs, and so I definitely grade a lot, um, and I think it's a really fascinating space. But there's just been like a real lack of transparency, accountability,
Yeah,
data in this space.
yeah. So I think the passion is such a double-edged sword. I mean, it's good that we have it because it shows that people care, but when it gets to be overly so, when people kind of lose their minds, I mean, I talked about the definition of what a fanatic is in an earlier episode, and it's like someone who's irrational. And so we just have a ton of irrational people in this hobby space. I think that's fantastic. What can go wrong, right, with that? But yeah, shout out to Neo. He was sitting next to you at the bar. I think he was like the one who's saying, "Yeah, yeah, no, that is card porn. Just continue, keep talking to him as if he's card porn." I was like, "Oh, fantastic!" Oh, and then I found out he's the one who found out about the Atlantic City website. So shout out to Neo, good guy in the hobby. Um, but can I ask you, which four did you submit with? Because I know I submitted with Arena Club, which I've been making content about right now, and then soon I'll be making content about CGC. I'm not getting paid by these folks. It's more of like you, and the whole concept of this podcast is try different things. I've submitted with PSA and Beckett, and I wanted to try
Yeah.
different ones. So, could you tell me which four you did it with?
Yeah, so I submitted with PSA. I did a bulk submission with them, 30 cards. I did a Beckett submission, which was 13 cards. I did a SGC submission, which was like I want to say 14 cards, and I did an arena submission. And I also went to Tag and tried to submit there, but I'm really big on Obsidian, and they don't do 55-point cards right now, and they don't do die
Mm,
cuts. And Obsidian is all those things, and so I couldn't actually grade with them, and I didn't really have anything else that I was looking to grade specifically with them to test out the service. But I tried. I used all four of those. First time using
excellent.
Arena, but it's funny because
Yeah.
it's like I have a reason for all of it, right? It's not just like me just like splitting them down the middle and saying like these go
Hmm.
to one, these go to another. There's I pre-grade everything, right? So I have a spreadsheet where I'll grade it myself and
Yeah.
determine like, okay, this is what I think the subgrades are, and then I'll send it off. So it's a bit of a process. and there's definitely like an angle to it.
So before I ask you the question, the next question I had about why you only do the four major ones, PSA, BGS, SGC, and CGC in your pop reports, not actually submitting, but um, I gotta say, I did two lives before national where I showed the cards that I was going to submit, and then the spreadsheet. Or no, the ones that came back from grading. And it's almost like you show the cards, and people just like, "Ooh, bright shiny! Let me see those cards. They look really nice." So I have like like 10, a dozen people at any time in the live, and I'm like, "Yeah, like they want to see cards." And then I ended the live, and I was like, "Oh, I forgot to do the whole spreadsheet, the part where I show the guessing of the grade, and declared value and all that." And it's almost like as soon as people saw the spreadsheet, they're like, "Nope, not going into this live." So like I didn't have more than like three people. It's like, oh yeah, spreadsheets are boring if you're not. I mean, it's boring to almost anyone, but unless you're in data where you have to do them all the time. And I found it, I would look at someone's what their grade guesses were, but maybe I just didn't do it in an optimized way for the live where I had like something in a whiteboard or something. But yeah, the spreadsheets, people just their eyes just glaze over them, I guess.
Yeah, it's hard to incorporate into YouTube videos. PC Sports Cards does a really nice job of overlaying the data. Like they'll actually sort of like overlay pop reports and overlay
Mm,
things that would be in a spreadsheet or are in a spreadsheet, but like in a way that sort of contextualizes it. It's hard. I don't do any content specific to it because a lot of the data I see data sort of through the lens of a spreadsheet and
hmm.
tables, and so it doesn't really translate to visualizations quite as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, spreadsheets are not for everybody. That's for sure, especially in this world.
Yeah, no, for sure. And when it comes to though, I mean, I'll give you credit. Your Instagram posts where you do the four major grading companies and across the months and across the gem rates, like I feel that you visually represent it in such an easily digestible way. So I guess my question that I wanted to do was, do you only do those four major ones, or is it only because with the amount of space you have in an Instagram, square that you can only fit four into the chart?
That's a fantastic question. It's definitely a bit of both of those. I think there's a few things actually. I mean, one is, I'm trying to stick to the most, reputable graders to start, and that was sort of like, GemRate stands for trust, or at least I wanted to stand for trust, and I want it to be high integrity data, and so I stick with grading companies right now that I know are going to sort of update their pop reports consistently. That have pop reports, right? Not all these emerging companies have pop reports. Even like one of our sort of founding principles was, or at least like sources of data was that we want, or ways to think about data was that we only wanted to sort of consume what the public saw. We wanted to be able to explain the data. If we can't explain the data, we don't really want the data. We don't want companies feeding us data. We don't get any of the stats directly from the company. That's one of the reasons we stick to the pop reports is we see the same data that everybody else sees. And so the main thing is you have to have a working pop report that I feel is like reasonably laid out and able to be sort of consumed by a human, but also programmatically. And then beyond that, I have to see sort of secondary market volume because you could grade a lot of cards at a grading company, or you could add a lot of cards to Pop Report that may never surface in the secondary market. And this hobby doesn't have like the cleanest past, and so I'm really cautious about adding companies until I actually see volume behind the slabs. And so even though these companies, I'm rooting for a lot of them. I think they make sense. I think their sort of stance and sort of like what they're bringing to the hobby makes a lot of sense and is really interesting. But I'm sort of reluctant to add them to sort of like the prime time report, the monthly report that we do, because they're just still early in the process. And it's not that I don't trust what they're doing. It's just they kind of have to be a little bit more established. GemRate sort of is aligning themselves in some ways, with these companies in saying that these are companies that we're sort of going to bat for, that they're going to be around for a while. We're not just throwing companies in and out of this report. We want consistency to be a big part of how we report. And so we just don't want to add a company and then have to sort of, we've had that issue right now, like CSG, for example, their pop report was down for half this year. And that's
Mm,
kind of like not been ideal. I know why they're doing it and I'm okay with it, but it's like not ideal. And we can't have like five of those sort of instances on our reports, or it just makes things hard to consume. And then the last thing is, yeah, the design side of it. It's just I don't want to have 10 companies on there,
right,
especially
right.
if only four of them are sort of driving the significant majority of the volume. And so there's like a tier two report that I'm thinking about doing, which is just like I'm
Hmm.
calling it tier two, but it's more of like an emerging report, which
Hmm.
is just maybe a couple slides. It's sort of like, you know, is a nod to the companies that are sort of newer and emerging in the space, but And I'm
Oh,
very intrigued by that, and I think it makes
yeah.
sense, but it's also not something that I'm exactly sure I'm going to market with it yet.
Gotcha. So one thing I wanted to ask, so many things I want to ask here, but when you said you know why CSG now CGC didn't put it up, is that publicly available or is that something that you just know and are not able to share right now?
Uh, no, I mean, it's publicly available in that they were reworking their data, and as I sort of saw what they were
Okay.
doing, a lot of these pop reports are subject. Look, I mean, everything is sort of for a reason in this world, and pop reports are really disorganized because the manufacturers don't give the grading companies a lot of data to work with, and so there's
Mm,
a lot of data entry. There's a lot of human error that enters the process when cards are handed off to a grading company, and
mm,
all of them are subject to it. And so with CGC, CSG being newer, they had data entry errors that they were cleaning up. They had duplicate cards on there. They're just trying to reduce errors. They were, I didn't know behind the scenes that they were doing this merger, but I think as they were preparing to sort of merge the entities, they were like, let's clean up our data and make this
I
sort of
see.
as smooth of a transition as possible. And so I could see that they were just reducing the duplicates. I could see that they were cleaning up,
I
the
see.
typos and the mislabeled parallels and things like that. And so, that takes a long time to get it right. And so I could see that was happening.
Card manufacturers not helping the grading companies makes me immediately think about the potentiality of more vertical integration by Fanatics. So let's not give them another reason to try to further cement the what do they call it, like from the cradle to the grave of a card type of thing. I'm sure they've already thought about all of this stuff. So moving on. So I wanted to ask. Um, or I wanted to reiterate something that you just said, a few minutes ago, which was that you don't take any inside information, you don't get fed any information. There's no bias with data and information. What you provide is what the public can find out by themselves if they wanted to. It's just that people are lazy and people don't want to. But like, you don't get anything fed. You don't have any insider information. You don't have like connections into the grading company. I'm sure you talk to some of the higher level folks, but you're not skewing anything, right? I mean, you're completely unbiased, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm as unbiased as I can be and objective as I can be. Yes, to that point, like everything we consume is what the public sees. Um, Nobody pays us to, we've had
Mhm.
companies approach us to, looking for inclusion in the pop report.
Mm,
We've had all the companies in some ways, shape, or form has sort of asked us about, API integrations if we'd be interested. And I'm just not interested in ways that I can't sort of have a little
mm,
bit more insight into. And sort of, if somebody asks me questions and if I can't explain it,
yeah.
that's not productive for anybody. So yes, that's definitely like a foundational or fundamental to how we're thinking about the data. And
No,
again, it's
yeah.
all free. One of the things that we're really thoughtful about is, we understand that we are pulling information from other sites that are making this data available, and we don't
Mhm.
want to sort of like siphon traffic away, and we don't want to sort of like
Mm,
monetize the thing that's exactly on their website, right? So we have to have some opinion or some sort of like way that we're adding value before we think about sort of how we're going to monetize what we're doing. And so I try to just remove friction. I link out to all the grading company sites. Like my big sort of my when I put on like my podcast politician hat is like, the better data, the more confidence people will have in the industry, the more people that will enter the industry, right? And so like that's the pitch I make is you think about like fanatics and collectors and all these companies that want the pie to grow, you need to have better data. And so this is like an entry point to just allowing people to sort of make better sense of it. Um, and yes, it's all what the public sees, and so I'm just wrapping it a little bit differently.
better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's. Not an official
I'm a Little
sponsor.
Caesars guy,
Yeah, Little
so I'm gonna
Caesars.
fight that hard.
Yeah, no, when you said better data, better transparency, leads to better result, I'm like better, better, better. And then you said the word pie, and I'm like pizza pie. Easy, easy link in my head. The synapses
Yep.
were just firing right off for that dad joke. Okay,
Unfortunate for
so
me, I really do not like Papa John's, so I'm gonna
sorry,
have to rework
sorry.
that bit.
It's so yeah, you're gonna have to get a little creative with the Roman Empire for your branding then or something. Um, so okay, that's the last time I'll say that pizza company because you are the guest of this pod. I want to make you feel comfortable. Um,
Thank you.
so I will say I will ask you. We were talking about how does GemRate work, and then you did a really great job explaining about just everything surrounding it, but not definitely not asking for specific numbers. But how does it work from a business model then? Because it's free for us, it's free for the grading companies. Like you're not doing this for free, I imagine. Like how does that aspect of things work for you?
Yeah. So real quick on the background, I mean, I had the luxury of sort of bootstrapping this for 2 years. I had a very, very small exit from a startup that I had worked at prior, which basically gave me 2 years of sort of runway of not working full time and just trying to dive into something that I was passionate about and see if I could, string it together and build a company. And so that was basically what I did, which is I just had a lot of belief that this data set could be used in a lot of different ways. And if I could sort of compile it in a way that wasn't gonna, you know, uh, put me in the poorhouse, then I would approach it. And it got dangerously close at times, but it's expensive to sort of do what I'm doing in the sense that I look at the pop reports every day and pull the data in every day. But that's really important to me in the sense that I want to be able to explain what's going on and if there's inconsistencies or things I need to be aware of, and that just requires daily recording of the data. As it relates to sort of like the monetization side of it, so I actually GemRate was entered into a B2B accelerator. So what that means is I'm with a cohort of companies that are, the B2B accelerator is much more focused on like lifestyle. So I won't go into like the whole spiel about venture capital, but like I think the sports card market was overcapitalized. Like I just think that too much money came in for how large the market was at the time, and people got caught up with crypto and a lot of different ways, NFT, and a lot of different ways the market could expand. And then obviously things corrected, and they corrected pretty hard. At the time I was just like focused on like what could I build that sort of would sustain sort of the ups and downs in the market. And I just felt like if I built a tool for collectors, which is what GemRate is focused on, we would be able to sort of like withstand ups and downs. Beyond that, though, I was really interested in like, okay, what could I do to sort of like scale the efforts? And so this B2B accelerator, which is really focused on like lifestyle companies, it's not necessarily focused on like venture capital. It's not necessarily focused on like home run exits, right? Like venture capital is geared towards like these outsized returns, $100 million plus, $1 billion plus outcomes. I just don't know that like the way that I sort of see GemRate working in a sort of like organic fashion, that's like what I envision. And so I wanted to be able to have more discretion over the timeline. I wanted to be a little bit more uh, able to sort of like react to market trends and sort of feedback. And so this accelerator called Tiny Seed I joined gave me some of that flexibility. It's not a ton of money, but it was enough to at least like pay myself a bit and cover some bills. And I joined that in November. On top of that, we started to monetize, and we actually sell the package data. So again, I don't want to do anything that the companies could directly do themselves, right? So like
Mhm.
PSA has APIs, SGC has APIs, Beckett will have APIs. If companies can give those APIs directly, I'm not really adding any value. I'm just sort of pulling in the data and doing the same thing that those companies would do individually. So a lot of our IP has been around merging the data and building this universal pop report, which has sort of like been my vision for a while, but it's not one that took a long time of collecting data and sort of like piecing together how I wanted to do that. But we started to make this universal pop report data available. It's not in a pop report in the sense of you go to a website, right? But if it's like if you gave me a card and you wanted to see a 2019 Zion Williamson Prism Silver and you wanted to see what that the grading stats look like for all grades across all the companies, we could give you that. And that's not something any individual grading company could give you, right? So that was where a lot of our IP sort of stems from. And so that is what we make available to a lot of the collection tools. So like your card, any tool with the name card in it is using this to some degree. Well, not everyone, but a lot of them. So like your card ladders of the world, card hedge, card base, they're using this data. But we're also making it available to auction houses. You'll start to see it a little bit more prominently on auction house websites. And they're using it to sort of contextualize cards, right? So, with pricing data, you want to understand it's kind of like the stock market, obviously like that can be triggering for a lot of people, but it's like the stock market in the sense of like there's a price and their shares outstanding. And what we're delivering to people is a lot of these companies have the price. We're delivering sort of like the population or the shares outstanding part of this equation. So when you're entering the
Mm.
market and you're looking at contextualizing, is this card appropriately priced? Is there potential for appreciation? We're sort of handing people the population or the shares outstanding part of that equation today. So that's how we're monetizing today. There's other ways, but that's sort of like the entry point for us at this stage.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that comprehensive explanation.
Is that your nice way of saying really long and
No,
long-winded
no, no, it's
explanation, or
not.
no?
It just gives me a lot of conversational threads. I mean, the first thing I wanted to say was, I think am I a tool with the name card, Denny Cards? Am I a tool? So, do I have to pay for this information? No, but no, this is really. I hope people gained a lot of information from that. So B2B for the people who are not aware, business to business, and accelerator again, venture capitalists. I mean, again, like a bubble was created. We all know that. And just the run up was really large. I wasn't there for it, but just hearing from everyone as to how crazy and wild it was. Venture capitalism is definitely in and out of the hobby, and when you're talking about outsized returns, I immediately think of like Zion and the ultra modern quarterbacks, like these everyone wants like the 10x and higher returns, and it's like I don't know. I mean, it's just it wasn't sustainable, I think. But no, I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad that you were able to bootstrap for 2 years. I mean, I'm sure you don't because you had to go through it. But tiny, the name is in there. It says tiny seed. It wasn't going to be like a huge seed. So, but I'm glad you got it off the ground.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks.
so okay, I'm done with all my jokes. No, there will be more later, but let's continue. We're about the 36-minute mark. Okay, so here's the thing. When I listened to Jesse and Mike talk with you about the, I think it was the May pop reports, and you gave a
Hmm.
rundown. Right now we're recording at the start of August, and in that podcast episode, you mentioned how, well, you mentioned many things, but like PSA was dominant with 85% of the market share. Then there was a dip in May. TCG, like I want to get into that a little bit about how dominant TCG is in grading companies. But you also mentioned that June may look good with maybe a pre-national spike. So I just kind of want to see a 2 month check-in with that information. Let maybe get a little bit more granular if you're okay with that, because I didn't really prep you to say that I was going to ask you about
No,
that.
no, no. Yeah, I mean, look, I publish these reports every month, and I do quickly like lose that information because I'm shifting context so fast. But what it
Yeah.
speaks to, or speaking to that podcast in particular, like I would say I was wrong in sort of my prediction there in the sense that I thought that the PSA sports card special would have started to hit the pop report sooner. I thought it was going to be productive for them. They did basically ran a 90s plus sports card special for $15, right, or whatever it was. It was something really affordable. And that's a lot of cards. That's the significant majority of cards that have been sort of produced and sort of matter to a lot of collectors outside of obviously the vintage market. And so I guess that's by definition. But anyway, the special has seems to be well received, but it's definitely not hitting the pop report to the degree that I thought it would. And so, like I think July was up 4% for PSA, 4% versus June, and 4% year over year, which is like not massive. They're still down off their highs. They were doing 1.2 million a month earlier this year, and they did just over a million. I think they did 1,040,000 in July around that, and so they've got a really high floor at this stage, but they're not like necessarily they're being carried by TCG still. The point you were making earlier, like they just opened up PSA Japan, and if you dig into the July numbers, a lot of their strength in July was through opening up that office. They basically opened up that office and started doing 10,000 more TCG cards a day in mid July, and so without that, I make that point to only say if you strip that out, it actually would have been potentially a down month. Had that happened, though, PSA might have put a little bit more urgency around like grading these sports cards and having them hit the pop report. I don't want to be so naive to think that like people are or working day in day out to sort of like have numbers hit the pop report that GemRate's going to report on. Like people aren't obviously like doing things internally to sort of, or at least like not at a grand scale to sort of like make sure that their GemRate numbers look good every month. I'm sure there's some like things in the margins people do, but anyways, point being is like there's some engineering that's happening here, population engineering. Like PSA knows sort of like, okay, we're gonna have Japan strong now, so we don't necessarily need to have like the sports card special hit. And I'm not exactly saying that's what's happening, but like if I'm
Mm,
looking in behind the scenes, like they're probably comfortable knowing that like, look, we're going to have this sports card special hit and that's going to hit in August. Right. And so they did like, they didn't
mm,
have like necessarily the strongest promotion offered to collectors in August, which was like a 60s focused sports card special, right? And a reholder special. So my point with that is just like, I feel like they kind of know that they have a backlog that's going to hit the pop report. So they can kind of like pull these levers to be like, show this trajectory. And again, it's not really GemRate focus. It's more like internally, how do we sort of continue to show progress? And so I think a lot of that's happening. And this was a long-winded answer of saying I was not right in the sense of like I thought sports cards were going to be a little bit more of the story in July, and I think it's going to be a bit more of the story in August instead. But
mm.
PSA Japan opening and TCG sort of hitting. TCG was 50% of the cards graded in July for PSA. Like that's massive. That is a
Wow.
massive number that I don't think anybody could have imagined even a year ago. They were doing 200,000 TCG cards a month. Now they're doing over 500,000. Right. So it's a
Wow.
massive number. Uh, it's 50% of cards being graded right now, and I think it's still sort of potentially going to take share of the overall market. So it still may even be early there.
I mean, I'm just doing the math quick in my head. Was 200,000 cards a month TCG, and now 500,000 cards per month. That's 300,000. There's 30 days in on average on a month, so that is 10,000 more per day, which sounds absolutely insane. But again, I mean, I don't even know. I have no like my kids collect Pokemon and they're just kind of I'm not into Pokemon as much, but that is just so impressive. So let's say you strip away all the Pokemon, is PSA's market share just lower from a sports card standpoint?
I don't know if it's lower from a share standpoint, but it's lower from a volume standpoint. Like what I mean by that is, I think basketball has sort of been the biggest headwind. Basketball for PSA, for example, was doing like 200 to 250,000 a month a year ago. It's only doing like 90 to 100,000 right now. So it's down by 60% of where it was, right? Or it's off 60% from where it was at its highs. That is a big headwind, and I don't think that's a PSA specific headwind. Although PSA definitely benefited from all the momentum in basketball during the peak, you know, the pandemic, and so that's a major headwind. But I don't think it's PSA specific. But it is definitely like this hobby kind of needs Wembenyama to be productive, because it trickles down into a lot of other rookies and vets, and you
Mhm.
saw what happened. I mean, it's not, it was an avalanche, but I do think like the snowball started with like Zion and Ja being
Oh,
collectible,
yeah, yeah,
and a lot of these other marginal players were hit in packs and breaks and all these different things that people just
right,
started grading to sort of like bail themselves out. I
right.
think that, if you have a Wembenyama that is sort of driving that market, you could see like a productive basketball market, but it really has sort of like limited the upside. So that's the reason where, like, to your question at the start, like they would be down. Like sports are down year over year, and it's mostly driven by basketball. You actually see baseball's okay and football's okay, but basketball is just getting crushed from the highs.
Wow. I'm putting a pin on my notes. Minute 42. This hobby needs Wembanyama. I am gonna figure out whether I'm gonna make that into a clippable thing for my promos for for the podcast. But no, that's oh my goodness. You are so knowledgeable. Thank you for all this information. And yeah, please go as long as you want because I'm just learning. What's great about this is like I don't really edit my podcast episodes with the StreamYard, but it's almost like I am like the premier audience of my own content where I get to learn all this and then a few days later I'll publish it. I mean, it depends on when because I have to do my own chapter episode about grading, but I can't wait for people to hear what you're saying. And I think I have to do it really soon because like you said, like it's almost like I don't know if you would agree with this, but like every day, every week, definitely every month, the grading landscape is shifting.
Yeah, I mean, well, one, I appreciate the feedback, and two, like you're saying, like being sort of the biggest consumer of what you're building is fun, and so I think that keeps it really authentic and organic and sets this up for success. So I definitely can appreciate that, and yeah, I mean, look, the grading landscape is like it gets a lot of attention, and it is pretty dynamic in the sense of just like there's a lot of news, a lot of noise, and a lot of opinions, and so these things I'm saying could definitely change. I do think these broader trends though of like TCG is here to stay. I think basketball needs a resurgence to sort of like bring some more upside into the grading
Yeah,
industry. But yes, I would definitely things that we're starting to see emerge or trends that I'm watching at least.
absolutely terrific. Thank you. Now I'm gonna figure out what I think that we might have to make this a two-parter because I haven't even gotten to the questions from Instagram, from folks where I made a post like, "Hey, I didn't say it was gonna be you, but I said, I'm gonna have a discussion with someone about copper quartz." And I have some really good questions for you. However, the first one I have to ask you, and this might be the start of part two, can we talk about declared value? Because that is the hardest thing for any submission that I have, where PSA or anyone, but they're like, "Hey, take a guess as to what your card's gonna cost."